Hey guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. During the following days, I'm going to be presenting a few miniature games from the recent European Team Championship 2025 that's just finished yesterday in Batumi in Georgia. So as you can see here on the left, many of the best players in the world participate in this tournament representing their European countries. Mamedyarov, Giri, for example, Kaimer, Fedosiev, Rapport, and many others. Whereas in the women's section, we have Kosteniuk, Zagnitse, Stavrula, Osmak, Batsiaviri, and many other very strong women players participating with their teams. So this has been a very interesting tournament, finished yesterday. Poland took the women's section quite convincingly, whereas in the open section there was a really big fight for first place, and finally Ukraine took the medal in the last round. Anything could have happened in the last round, but Ukraine prevailed. Two very strong teams, of course, but especially in the open section, anything could have happened. So today we're going to kick things off with a game between a grandmaster from Romania, David Gavrilescu, and a FIDE master from Georgia, Georgia B team, Qalichava. So let's bring up the board here. Now I've picked this game because I think it's quite an interesting way of seeing how opening theory is going forward, and more specifically there's an interesting idea that I hadn't seen before in this line, although I did know the idea, the pattern from another similar position, something we can probably learn. But more importantly, I've chosen this game to kick things off with because at some moments Akaki with black will make a huge blunder, but one of these blunders that it's not easy to spot why it's a blunder, and it goes to show how even strong 2300 FIDE masters can, more or less anyone can mess up in just one move and throw away a game which up to that point he'd be playing quite well. So let's get into the action here. Grandmaster Gavrilescu, 23-year-old, strong player, 25-35, obviously a favorite in this game. He starts with e4 and Akaki goes for c5. As usual, we have on the left of the board the information of the player plus his or her photograph if available on chess.com. But also, as I mentioned in a previous video, I enjoy having the times here on the left. That does allow us to see in specific moments how the players used up their time, or if they thought for a long time, or if they're under time trouble, etc, etc. So knight f3, e6, d4, open Sicilian, and black goes for the Taimanov variation with knight to c6. This is a very good and solid choice for black, one of the better Sicilians, played by many strong players. Vishy Anand played this for many years. He comes to mind as probably one of the better players using this variation. So black does immediately put pressure on the knight, therefore preventing moves such as bishop to d3. Now here, the main move has always been knight to c3, which is the move that was played in the game. Alternatively, knight to b5 has always been considered to be interesting, preparing the so-called Maroczy bind. I've actually played this myself, and it's quite interesting to play. So if you do decide to play the Taimanov, you have to be prepared to face one of the lines of the Maroczy bind. Knight to c3. Here both queen to c7 and pawn to a6 are played more or less indistinctively, but the real Taimanov goes for the queen to c7. Notice that here knight to b5 looks attractive, but actually after queen b8 followed by a6, black will recover the tempo that he's lost with the queen, and the queen is actually reasonably well placed here, controlling these squares, and after a6 and b5 it can be useful to play b4. So knight to b5, not the best move. I enjoy playing bishop g3 here. This is my pet line with white. But bishop to e3 is the choice of Gavrilescu, and that is the choice, the main choice nowadays of top players. a6, queen to d2. Now, here, most players used to play queen to d2 here. Knight to f6. Generally, f3 would be played here. And black has this bishop to b4 move, which for many years has been a thorn in the side of white players, because by pinning the knight, black is trying to go for the move d5 at some point. Theory has evolved, and nowadays it's been demonstrated that this line isn't as strong as it used to be. So a lot of players carry on playing this line with white, queen to d2, f3, long castle. But some other players, if they want to sidestep this line, they go for the move a3, which might seem to be a bit passive, but in fact it sidesteps bishop to b4, but it also helps to prevent b5 and b4. So it's not bad, this move. It has to be said though that when you move a pawn on your castle king situation, you have to be prepared for a quick attack with b5, b4, opening up the king. So sometimes it's a good idea to delay long castling just in case. Anyway, after a3, there are several moves here. b5 is the main move. And now a very good move by white. One of the key ideas in this move. I've checked the theory, and in this position nearly everyone plays this move. Knight takes c6. And the idea behind this move is we exchange knights on c6. By the way, preventing any shenanigans with knight to e5 and knight to c4. And black has a choice here. If he captures with the pawn, a very interesting idea is queen to g4. I hadn't seen this idea specifically in this position. Knight to f6 and queen to g3. And the idea is after this exchange of queens, although the position is more or less equal, f3, a4, white does have a small edge here, and if he enjoys playing these positions, it's good for white. So this queen to g4 idea is quite interesting. Of course, most players recapture with the queen, which is the normal move, preparing bishop to b7 and putting a lot of pressure on this diagonal. And this is the moment where white brings a new move, which has been played before, but it's relatively new. Most players go bishop to d3, or especially bishop to e2, followed by castling on the king side, perfectly playable. But Gavrilescu plays h4, and every day I'm seeing many games of the Sicilian where white throws in this h4, h5, no doubt influenced by AlphaZero and other modern engines who really enjoy throwing in this pawn move, gaining space, and as we should see in the game, allowing the rook to develop by the side. Computer seems to suggest that this move is good, so I think we'll be seeing it more often in the future. h5. Of course, here, if as soon as the knight or the bishop moves, white will stick in h6 and break open black's king side where he is expected to castle. I was thinking about playing b4 here, just trying to get some aggression. But then I noticed that after bishop takes b4, white has a very good move here, queen to d4, hitting the bishop and hitting the pawn on g7. And I played about a bit with this position, and I noticed that the attack on the king side and the pair of bishops was much stronger than the slightly damaged pawn structure. This is very good for white. Basically, it's a winning position. And f6 could be played, stopping the threat on g7. But again, we go with this move. And this sort of position, although there's a lot to play for still, I think that white has better chances in many of these endgames. Although it's still a game, of course. Anyway, black decided to play h6. And up to now, as you can see by the clocks, Akaki wasn't at all surprised by this h4, a5. He's played very fast, so he knows what he's doing. But then again, Gavrilescu has played the opening also rather fast, so he's in preparation. Rook to h3 after 7 minutes thought, so maybe he wasn't expecting his opponent to play h6 so fast, so he took his time to make sure everything was okay. Knight to f6. Now there is a threat on the pawn of e4. Of course, if we play f3 now, it's okay, but we do limit the action of this rook, so e5 is aggressive and preferred. Knight to e4, and we're arriving at the key moment of the game. Now the computer suggests that here both knight takes knight, but also bishop to d4, which was the move played in the game, both are correct, but black is close to equality here. He doesn't have any weaknesses, and with bishop to c5, he's finishing development. Akaki has started thinking, but I wouldn't be surprised if Gavrilescu had this type of position in his opening preparation. In any case, he plays the correct move now. Queen to d3, preparing to long castle, finish his development, but also threatening knight takes knight, queen takes knight, queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, and bishop takes bishop, winning a piece. So there is a direct threat here. Which is the best way to parry this threat? Maybe just exchanging knights on c3 and following up with the exchange of queens on e4. Now I've messed around with this position, and although I still think white is very slightly better, I also think that with correct play, black should be able to hold. Bishop to b4 I thought could be a good move here, trying to exchange bishops and get a pawn on b4. But of course, this is still very tricky. I did notice that if the pawn on c2 is captured, we get the pawn back with bishop to b5, and I think white is doing very well here. In any case, after this position, maybe just exchange and king to e7. And although maybe white has a microscope advantage, I think black should be able to hold here with something like rook to d8, followed maybe by d6. But black didn't play that. He obviously noticed that there was a threat on the knight and on the bishop, but he preferred to defend that threat with rook to c8. And as you can see by the evaluation bar on the left of the board, this is a huge mistake. Played after about 7 minutes by a strong FIDE master, who obviously was only expecting the sequence knight takes knight, queen takes knight, queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, bishop takes bishop, rook takes bishop, and all is good for black. But there's something wrong with this line. I'm sure most of you have already picked up the mistake. If we go back a couple of moves, in this position, black missed in his calculations the move rook to c3. This fantastic rook luft on the third rank, pinning the bishop and therefore winning material. Game is over. Of course, heartbreaking for Akaki, but a player of his level should be able to spot these tactics if he's fully immersed in the game. Making me think that maybe some of these 7 minutes he thought maybe he was walking around. It's hard to say, but it's a big mistake tactically. Of course, Gavrilescu captured the knight. Now Akaki realized he'd made a big mistake and he tried to bail out with bishop takes d4. Of course, if queen takes d4, then queen takes e4 and all is good. But Gavrilescu noticed knight to d6, check, intermediate move. If king to e7, we can capture the rook with check. So king to f8 was only move, and queen to d4. And unbelievably, Akaki decided to resign in this position. Of course, he's completely lost. I'll show you why. But even so, in a team game, resigning so early does give a big advantage to the rest of your teammates, your opponent's teammates actually. Although most of them can see that you have a bad position, but some of them might think, okay, he's fighting, he might have some idea to hold the game. Now, by resigning, everyone knows they're a point down, they have to start risking on their boards. So what is happening here? Of course, we're threatening to win the rook, but also we're threatening rook to c3. So for example, rook to c7 would lose immediately to rook to c3 and the rook would be lost. So there's basically no way to lose material. Rook to b8 would protect both pieces, but here, again, rook to c3, maybe queen to d5, and simply queen to f4. And this is very difficult to prevent. One line would be f6, pawn takes pawn, and if pawn takes pawn, then it's mate in two. Black is completely lost here. It's actually really hard to find a suggestion which doesn't involve giving up material. We don't really want to sacrifice the queen on d6. That's the same as resigning. But I don't know, maybe b4, knight takes rook, queen takes, king g8. This would obviously prolong the game, but there is no doubt in my mind that white would end up winning this position with the extra exchange and better pawn structure. So the resign was correct, maybe slightly early, but in any case, the game was totally over. So what have we learned in this game? Of course, we've learned a new opening idea, this h4, h5, rook h3. I think this is useful to know. If you play the Taimanov with black or with white, you have a better grip on what's happening here in the opening. But I think more importantly, how just one mistake, one blunder, one moment of a lack of concentration can severely damage your chances to hold the game. So, hope you enjoyed the game. I'll be bringing more games for the European Team Championship in the following days, so stay tuned to the channel. Enjoy, improve, learn, have fun, and see you on the boards. Take care.